you've got to hustle all the time. And I really enjoyed that for a couple of years. And then I didn't anymore.
Hey there, hi there. Hi. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, founder and podcast producer at Max Podcasting. And you can reach me at max@maxpodcasting.com to save time with your high-quality podcast. This is episode 127 if you switch it up and make it a 172. And today's guest is Jon Staff, the CEO and founder of Getaway. Getaway is exactly what it sounds like. An amazingly cool, I don't think I've ever used amazingly cool before. That's a new one. A company that places beautiful cabins in the woods and other remote, beautiful places in nature for the sole purpose of helping you unplug, get away, reconnect with yourself or loved ones, and just chill out. Jon and the team at Getaway have a super duper duper cool story, and in this episode we talk everything from the founding of Getaway to appearing on Shark Tank to just how special it can be to disconnect from Wi-Fi for a little bit. It is Johnny Staff. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Jon Staff, founder and CEO of Getaway, one of the coolest companies out there. I often, especially over the past couple of years, have been really excited whenever my fiance Dana and I do a little weekend trip, anything like that, and I always use the term Getaway. And then I discovered there's a company literally called Getaway that is all about unplugging, getting out there, doing really cool stuff. Jon, thanks for joining. How you doing today?
Hi, Max. I'm great. That was a nice thing to say. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I figure I'll just be mean for the rest of this, so I figure I'll
All
put
right,
one
great.
nice thing in there. Really appreciate what you do and you spending your time with us today. We're going to get into the Getaway story, of course, but before that, I've noticed in your background that you've been involved in founding, I'll call it several entrepreneurial ventures, a few different ones over the past several years. Where does that entrepreneurial knack come from? Like, is that something that you've always had?
I think so. I mean, where it probably comes from most directly is I just couldn't have a boss. I tried it a couple of times in college and even in some of these startups. And every time I had a boss, I said, well, I want that person's job. I want to be the person calling the shots. And so I think I just had a restlessness to captain my own ship, is where it primarily came from.
And when was the first time that you realized that restlessness?
First real venture, I mean, as a kid, I was doing yard sales when I was in elementary school, and my parents owned this bar in a one street town. And literally, as a 3-year-old, I sat next to the cash register and made change. So I sort of had it in my DNA from childhood. But the first real venture was in college, when you're supposed to be having fun and partying and learning and so on and so forth. And instead of doing that, my roommate and I started a frozen yogurt shop in the town over from where we went to school. Took out a bank loan. I have no idea how we got it. We had no credit. We had no money. But it was before Pinkberry had really made it to the East Coast. And so we did a version of that. And in many ways, it was the smallest, least significant business, I guess, in my career, but probably the highest learning curve to really be on the hook for. You've got to make payments every month and you've got to open the door every day. So that was the first, I guess, real one.
I remember that. I feel like there was a sweet spot. I mean, now there's Froyo everywhere, but there was a sweet spot when like Froyo shops started coming up, and it was like there was a new one on every corner, and
Totally.
Most of the time it had a name with like a color and a fruit in the name, I think. But what's something about running a Froyo shop that you think most people would be surprised by?
I don't know if it's surprised, but the thing I learned is that I really take into Getaway is you got to do the same thing every day. So in our case, we were still in school, so we scheduled all of our classes to be in the morning so that we could get to the shop by 11 a.m., cut fruit for an hour and then open it and, have it be open from noon till 11 p.m. And you can do that once, you can do that twice, but when you got to do that every day, it takes a lot of stamina and endurance to, you know, stay at the top of your game. So sort of an obvious lesson, but you learn it differently when you do it day in and day out. And that's why at Getaway, I so appreciate our team and our managers who, show up every day with the energy to do, sort of the same thing over and over again and do it at a very high level.
So let's get away from this intro segment and get to Getaway, which is incredibly corny. I apologize. I'll see myself out. But you have an amazing, super cool company, growing, got some awesome funding behind it. And I'm all for travel. I'm all for getting away. So it's really like best of both worlds with that and the entrepreneurship here. But for anyone who's not familiar with Getaway, I think nowadays, obviously, when people think of travel, and you might kick me off, but when people think of travel, they think of, traditional hotels or they think of Airbnb. What makes Getaway so different from Airbnb?
Getaway is all about having more free time in your life. So the entire reason we exist is to be a reaction to a world that has become completely overconnected and overwhelming, where every minute of every day is filled with something, whether that something be, your boss being on your case or a push notification interrupting whatever you were trying to think about, or all of the, the many duties people have at home or whatever. It's a lot. And there's more and more of it all the time. And so we are a counterbalance to that. And that's the whole reason we exist. And so the product is a lot like a hotel or a lot like an Airbnb, but the purpose is what I just described. And we try to stay really true to that. So, what it means, more concretely is that these cabins don't have Wi-Fi and they never will. There is a cell phone lockbox where you put your cell phone and your devices when you check in. There is no lobby and check-in desk and bar and restaurant or any real group gathering spaces because, we aim to be a reaction to first, too much work and too much time in the city and, too much digital time, but also a reaction to seeing and hanging out and meeting other people. All those things are great. I live in Brooklyn. I love the city. I have a job I really like, and I hope everybody has that, is my dream. But we need counterbalance to all of these things. And so that's what Getaway aims to provide. And we try to be super clear about, what we are and what we're not. And so I would say it's the purpose that primarily sets us apart from those other things, which I view as, agnostic. If you pay the rent and you don't, cause the neighbors too much trouble, a hotel or an Airbnb doesn't really care what you do, whereas we care a lot about what you do, which is ideally nothing, or if not nothing, have a deep conversation with yourself or with the people you really care about and came with.
Appreciate you sharing that. It's such a stark different, I almost said starch difference. This could get into laundry puns here, but it's such a stark difference between those other companies and other forms of travel because it is so purpose-driven, purpose-focused. I mean, if you check out your website, it's all over your branding. And even in your podcast, when you listen to it, it takes you into the wilderness. It takes you to another location. It really does help you get away. So I think it's so awesome that this comes from that tension of needing to unplug and get away. When for you did that tension reach a point that you said, hey, we might start a company around getting away and getting unplugged one day?
I was 25 years old, and I only half jokingly will say I had my midlife crisis. I'd been doing, I'm not that many years into my career at that point. I'd been doing startups. I totally had drank the Kool-Aid of, rise and grind or whatever it is. You're in it 24/7. You've got to hustle all the time. And I really enjoyed that for a couple of years. And then I didn't anymore. And I remember in that, the first real job I had out of college, my boss let me buy an iPhone, my first smartphone, on the company credit card. And I thought that was, the best thing ever. I became the hero because I figured out I can, cook dinner and answer my email and, be super productive all the time. And I thought I was really smart for a couple of years. And then I realized, everybody else had that same idea at roughly the same time. And now we're all not just, kind of staying ahead of our work, but we're all obligated to be doing that. And so, I hit kind of 25 and I said, I can't do this anymore. Maybe I had the stamina, maybe I had the endurance, but I didn't want to. Life is too short. The way we spend our days is the way we spend our lives. And I did not want to spend my days, constantly working and constantly connected, even though I, mostly like the things I was working on. And so I said, I got to figure this out for me personally, how to have, I guess, what you might reductively call more balance in your life, or more balance in my life, and set out to try to figure that out. Roughly at the same time, genuinely, I was trying to figure out what is a company, what is the next company I want to start and build. And I took a 5-month road trip through the West, and was really trying to sort that out and sort out my own thoughts and feelings, and discovered tiny houses and said, okay, this might be part of the solution for me. I want one of these things. I want to stick it in the woods far enough away from where I live so that I can, escape, but have it be near enough so that I can do that frequently. And what I promised myself is it wouldn't have Wi-Fi. It would be a sacred place where I didn't do work, and hopefully nobody would bother me. But I didn't have any money to buy or build one of these things. So I said, maybe, hopefully it's a company and I can raise some funds and we can do a little pilot. But and that's what we ended up doing. But it was much less obvious back then that there were other people that wanted that. And fortunately, I'm not so unique, and there are a lot of people who are looking for something like that.
And there's nearly endless directions you can go. Well, physical directions you can go. I mean, you went west at the start there, but directions you can go in terms of what does a company like this actually look like? What was involved in those early days of figuring out, we're using cabins. What do these look like? What's the process of people actually using it? How'd you get the ball rolling on those early days?
Man, I wish there was some grand plan. There wasn't much of one. There was an interest in these tiny houses. I have a father who I'm grateful for, who is a builder, a handyman. So he came and I said, let's figure out how to build one of these things. So I flew him from Minnesota to Boston, or maybe he drove, I can't remember. I rented a workspace.
We won't hold it against you or him.
Yeah, literally in a garbage dump under the Tobin Bridge in Boston, where we built the first one of these things. Or really, he did, with some helpers we found. And then we had the question of where do we put this thing? And had very little money. And so I wrote to everybody on Craigslist trying to sell land in rural southern New Hampshire. And I said, I can't buy your land, but will you lease it to me? Almost everybody said no, but one guy named Peter said yes. And so, we drove these, I towed the cabins. I couldn't find anyone else who wanted to do it because they're big and they're bulky, and we hadn't really measured how high they are compared to the power lines. So I had a harrowing drive to New Hampshire, set these things up, and waited to see what would happen, and waited to see if anybody would come. And a lot of the early decisions were just driven by necessity is the mother of invention. So I said, genuinely had the instinct that we shouldn't have Wi-Fi, and I didn't want it. But this was 2015, and thought maybe people will riot if we don't have it. But the reality was I couldn't figure out how to provide it anyway. And so we said, we're going to stay true to that initial instinct and not have it. So a lot of decisions were made like that, just based on what is possible.
And it saves you router costs, if router costs are even a thing.
The sad secret, I'll give you one secret, which is it doesn't actually, because we have smart locks in the cabin. So there is a connection, just not one that's not available to use on your phone or your laptop or whatever.
And what else, besides no Wi-Fi, besides these smart locks, besides kind of just being made to chill out with yourself or whoever you're with, what else makes these cabins special?
A couple of design principles that we established in the very beginning. One was, we want these to be, like, we compared it to hardware. And this is really a tool that allows you to escape to nature, as opposed to it being, we're trying to create some beautiful, grand architectural masterpiece. It's like, the best version of a getaway cabin just fades into the background, and it takes care of you while you're experiencing nature and you're, strengthening your relationships with your partner or your kids or the people you care most about. So that was number one. And then number two was we wanted to provide everything you need and nothing you don't. So as we've talked about, no Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff, but everything else we wanted to be there. And, the team is tired of me going on about it, but, we talk a lot about matches to light the campfire and, try to remind ourselves that every, guest that's coming to us, at least first time guest, is taking a real gamble, and trusting us with their time, trusting us with their money, driving to a part of, the country they may have never been to before, they may be less comfortable in, and, giving up a weekend or whatever to do so. And then they finally get to their cabin, they're really excited. And if we've forgotten the matches, or if the matches don't work, then, suddenly we've stolen so much time from that guest because they've got to get back in the car. They don't know where the store is. And all they really wanted to do was, start a campfire and have s'mores. So we're really obsessive about these small details and get them right almost, most of the time, to the great credit of our team. And in a way that I think is really important for our brand and the experience and for our business, because, we try to set expectations appropriately, and truthfully, probably set expectations a little bit low because, I think people, imagine it to be a pretty rustic experience, and it is. It's a cabin in nature, and there's not all that much there. But when they check in, and the sheets are really nice, and it's really clean, and the matches are there, and you don't have to hunt for the light switch. Like we obsess over stuff as small as that. Like the minute you spend looking for a light switch is a minute you could have spent disconnecting and recharging and all that good stuff we want to do. So that's what drove the design primarily.
That hits close to home. Spent many a minutes searching for the proper light switch, especially in a home that's not your own most of the time. So you've had incredible growth and grown as a company to building your team. You've had some amazing funding and PR, and we'll get to Shark Tank a little bit later, but you've grown locations across all different regions of the U.S. What can you attribute to being the biggest growth driver for you in Getaway?
Number one thing has to be good luck with timing, and with the cultural moment. Like I said earlier, I had this desire to have something like Getaway exist in the world. And there are different views on, who you should listen to when you start a startup company. Some people will say, go read Mary Meeker, go read TechCrunch, go read the research, go read the data, follow the trends. This was very much not that. This was follow my gut and create something that I wanted for me. And that really cleared away a lot of noise in the beginning because I could trust my own instincts, or at least I made the choice to trust my own instincts. And then I found out I wasn't that unique, and that a lot of people were feeling what I felt. And, this isn't all about digital disconnection, but to just tap into that moment of it. Like, it feels passe to talk about like too much screen time and whatever. 2015 it already did. And, now we're 6 years later. But this stuff is new. Like, the iPhone came out in like 2007 or something. Like, yes, we talk about it all the time, and it can be sort of, old hat to go on about it, but we're still adjusting. We are the frogs in boiling water, trying to figure out how to live in a world that is completely changed. And so, I think the most important driver of all that growth was, I just happened to be at a moment in my life where I bet on my instincts that just weren't that different from what a lot of other people did. And then we listened to them, like all these years later, it was just me going on about this, like we would have been out of business a long time ago, but we obsessed about, getting feedback and talking to our guests and our customers from day one. And so that really allowed us to validate a lot of our instincts and then invalidate some of them and change some things.
And what did that, we'll call it the validation process, look like? How did you actually hear that, hey, you know what? You're not that unique. There's lots of people that want to do the same thing.
The earliest things that came in said, I told you we were worrying about like no Wi-Fi, like might drive people crazy. And then we got love notes from people saying, thank you for not having Wi-Fi. And, I rounded
probably not love texts or love emails though.
Yeah, right. People would say I rounded the last bend and my cell phone reception went down from, 1 to 0 or 2 to 1 or whatever. And so that really, we paid attention to that. And we said, okay, this is, people are rejoicing at the fact that our product is not providing something that most businesses like ours would feel absolutely necessary to provide. So that was validating. And then the other thing that happened and is still happening was in the early days, like I didn't have any real estate or hospitality experience. So a lot of these notes were like, we loved it. It was great to be in nature. We really enjoyed being at the campfire, but the electricity didn't work and the pipes were frozen, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong because we had no anticipation of being sold out of the gate, which we were. And we launched in July, but we sold out our first February and our first January and our first March, and it was rural southern New Hampshire. So a lot of that initial guest feedback was just like very tactical, like you got to fix this, you got to fix that, which was super helpful. And I'm grateful we had such understanding guests. But what followed very closely on the heels of that was people telling us their stories. And, we weren't asking for them. We're happy to receive them. And a lot of it was, we came to celebrate a birthday or an anniversary or whatever, which is amazing. And it happens a lot at Getaway, but some of them were really deep. Some of them were like, I was going to get divorced. And like, I booked this thing so I could sort that out in my own head. And I wasn't going to bring my husband, but my husband begged me to come at the last minute. And we sat by the campfire and we talked for 4 hours, and these guests are telling us like, you solved my marriage. And then my dumb joke is like, okay, we're going to go run Facebook ads that say, come to Getaway, we'll solve your marriage.
Yeah.
But people are talking about quitting their jobs or starting new nonprofits, or, I'm with my kid every day, but like, we're actually talking to each other at Getaway. So now we go, once a month for father-daughter time. And that was so validating to say, okay, like people are really getting something out of this, and we really need to protect whatever is providing that, and make sure to invite people into it because it seems really meaningful to folks and meaningful to us.
You started something to help people get away, and it's resulting in bringing people together. That's really powerful.
I love that you said that. Yeah. Now, sometimes people think it's antisocial because I said before, like we don't have, you don't meet strangers at Getaway. And like, I'm a sucker for a good party. Like I like meeting new people, but there's a time and a place for it. And, Getaway is not one of them. Getaway is a place for, you and your loved ones to strengthen your relationships and do that, in what I might call the safety of your own private space. Like when you get to Getaway, you see the other cabins as you drive in, but your cabin is privately sited. You have your own view of nature. You sit at a campfire pit and don't look at other people sit at a campfire pit. But, we work really hard to make sure this just feels like a place where you can totally be yourself. You can not worry about the gaze of other people. We go so far at the beginning, but here's a minor detail, but we didn't have mirrors because we wanted this to be a place where you don't have to worry about your hair. You don't have to worry about your makeup. We ran into the practical reality that some people wear contacts. So now we have a mirror, but it's hidden behind a cabinet door because we just want to free you from, the big and the small things that just kind of invade our brains all the time and prevent us from, really disconnecting and recharging and rejuvenating.
This is a bit ironic, but I know that you and your co-founder were talking about how, you created these things to get away and to help people unplug. But because it's your business, whenever you're in one, you're constantly thinking about how to improve, and you kind of are thinking about the business side of things. So technically you're not really unplugged. How are you able to do almost like a next level unplug? Like have you found a way to de-stress and finally stop thinking about the business every now and then when visiting these sites?
My partner Michael staged an intervention because of this. We would go to Getaway and, we were meant to go for a nice weekend or whatever. And I would spend the whole time making notes and thinking of all the things we're not doing well or haven't started yet and need to get to, and ruin the whole experience. So the deal that we struck is we set a timer for an hour. I obsess and go into neurotic mode, and then the timer goes off at the end of an hour, and then I have to be done. And then we have a campfire and we do the Getaway thing, which has helped.
It's amazing. The Getaway intervention. That's perfect. If you need a podcast intervention because you're constantly thinking for maybe even an hour and 1 minute or beyond about ideas for what your dream podcast would look like, you can see it, you can feel it, you can taste it. Maybe you can't taste it. Maybe you can. Hit me up at max@maxpodcasting.com to book your podcasting intervention. I will help you get over the hump and get that podcast, maybe even tasteable podcast, out into the world. That's max@maxpodcasting.com. Now, back to Jon, who's got a pretty wild and innovative and meaningful creative example. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week!
Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. This is where we talk about creative marketing, ad, approach, campaign, caught your attention. And you mentioned Brooklyn. Obviously, anybody who's lives in New York area or been to New York, the subway is something that you might frequent very many times. And there's a pretty clever and meaningful series of ads that you recently saw on the subway. You mind sharing what that is?
Yeah, I saw this ad campaign that was raising awareness for folks experiencing homelessness. And what was unique to me about it was the placement of the ads, which were on the floor or, kind of half on the floor, half up the wall, as if it were a person sitting. And they say things like, if this poster were a homeless person, most people wouldn't even look down. Or they say things like, this is a bad place for a poster. It's an even worse place for a bed. And, it struck me, one, as a creative idea for a marketing campaign, but a powerful one that, makes us realize, especially in a city like New York, that we do really become desensitized to the experiences of folks around us. And, in part, I think that's just self-defense and reality, but I appreciated this campaign for sort of bringing it back to my attention.
Yeah, I think whenever, and this one obviously takes on a more powerful or purposeful meaning than a typical ad, but I think whenever you see an ad that's very clever in where it's actually placed and the location of it, I think it just can make it so much more meaningful. Like you can see, like, what was it about these ads that in the flurry of being on a New York subway and, the classic New York of, I'm sure, trying to get to where you're going to next pretty quickly, what made them truly pop out at you?
The simplest ideas are often the most powerful, right? And the simple idea here that got my attention was, oh, I wouldn't have expected to see something down there. Now I'm going to look at it. Now I'm going to read it. And then, of course, the concept of the campaign is this isn't just a goofy place to put a poster. It's calling attention to what this space is and what the space means for the reality of some folks. And that's the point of advertising, or the point of communications, is to get some passerby to think a new thought, pay attention to something that they had no idea they were going to think about. And this pulled me in through its placement, but through the concept behind the placement.
I can envision a series of Getaway subway ads that are focused on marriage counseling, but are somewhere in the subway world. I think that's your next after your Facebook ads campaign. Let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
No, but I'll try.
Oh, man. No one's ever ready. I don't know why I ask that, but here we go. Let's get wild. Where would be your dream location for a getaway cabin placement?
Superior Entry Beach. It's the westernmost tip of Lake Superior. I think it's the longest freshwater beach in the world. It connects Duluth Entry to Superior Entry, Duluth, Minnesota to Superior Entry. You can only get there by boat, and it's such a powerful spot. It's so quiet, but you look out over, the entire 380-mile length of Lake Superior, and you sit up by the campfire, and if you're lucky, you'll watch one of these 1,000-foot freighters come from all the way across the lake with a little pinprick of light that initially you mistake for a little fishing boat that must be pretty close, and then you watch it for an hour or two come closer and closer and closer, and you realize it's this giant ship. So for me, that's where I'd want to be.
I really love the way you painted that picture. I want to go like swimming, maybe even skinny dipping in Lake Superior now, even in the freezing cold. I think that that just sounds magical.
Now is not the right time.
Yeah, I know. Definitely not. Well, maybe not skinny dipping. You spent some time studying in Amsterdam. What was your favorite part of Amsterdam?
Cycling. I had this weird experience. The study abroad program told us to go buy bicycles under a bridge. So literally the official instruction was go buy a stolen bicycle, which I regret as an adult person. But the beautiful thing that happened is I bought this bike for 20 euros or whatever, rode it everywhere because, of course, there's amazing cycling infrastructure and cycling culture in Amsterdam for the entire semester. And then 1 week before the program ended, my bike was stolen. And so I ended up viewing it as this beautiful, circular system that provided me a bicycle for just the time I needed and then took it away from me at the right moment.
And that's your second story in this interview, under a bridge. So everything is circular back to
Good
starting
point.
and finding and stealing things under the bridge as well. You also went to Harvard. And I think Harvard, obviously, the reputation precedes it. For the majority of people who did not study at Harvard, what's something that, from your time at Harvard, was unexpected about just whether it be campus life or school, or just your experience there overall?
Well, to be extra obnoxious, but in a way that relates to your question, I went twice. I went for college and business school.
I was going to ask you that twice, actually.
What surprised me most about business school is, having been there for college, I was in Harvard Square seeing all these HBS jackasses in their vests with their crests on them for 4 years. And they truly seemed obnoxious. And to the extent that, when I decided to apply and got into HBS, I felt super grateful to, be allowed to do that, but very nervous that I was going to spend, 2 years with these jerks. And the surprise was I made the best friends of my life there in that program. Not everybody was great. There were jerks for sure, but the super majority were really wonderful, kind, empathetic, thoughtful, down-to-earth folks that I became very close to, like such that I have a conspiracy theory that, after the 2008 crash, the HBS leadership gathered in a bunker and they're like, oh no, we did this to the world. We need to do a 180 and change things, because the people I observed around town during college were not the ones that I met once I was there.
I don't think I've ever heard the official term HBS jackasses, but it has a ring to it. That could be a book. What is a weird talent you have? Something that doesn't necessarily impact your work at all, but you're just really good at it. It could be anything, like around the house or a party trick, something like that.
I have no real talents or tricks, but my friends, I think, would say the thing I do uniquely is ask deep questions immediately out of the gate to strangers, often at parties. So when we're at the phase of the conversation, which is so what do you do? I'm like, do you think about death?
Start with death.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Hey, deep questions makes for very interesting conversations. And then last one, alluded to the Shark Tank experience earlier. How did you prepare for Shark Tank?
Harder than anything I've ever prepared for in my life, more than any test or exam or whatever, because you're on stage. It's a performance, and you're battling, 6 people who are pretty, intense probably in their own lives, but now are in a setting where presumably the premise is for them to be extra intense. They're not your friends. And one of the hard parts is just, they're all talking to you at once. So you need to be very careful to keep track of all their questions and all their concerns, and, try to figure out when to go down the rabbit hole in response to what they want to hear and when to not. So it was stacks of index cards to memorize every number of the business and to anticipate every pushback they might have and to be aligned on, all of our messaging. I did it with my co-founder, Pete Davis. The one commitment we made to each other, I think I can share this. Hopefully, Pete, forgive me for sharing this story if you listen to this, but we're I think honest people with integrity, but we really made a commitment to we cannot lie. We cannot get caught in a lie, because that's how you really would embarrass yourself on national TV. And so, but our big fear was that the narrative of this episode would be these Harvard assholes.
Or jackasses.
And exactly. So we're halfway through filming this thing and nobody's brought up Harvard at all, which is great. And then somebody starts going down, that clearly is not on our side any longer. And then says, oh, by the way, where'd you go to school? And Pete's response in our rehearsals was, let's just tell them we went to Reed. We cannot tell them we went to Reed. We have to be honest with them. And so at this moment, we said, well, we went to Harvard. And this particular person said, Never met anyone ever from there that was any good at anything. I've lost money every time I've invested in anyone from that school. And so it kind of blew up, but miraculously did not make the final edits of the episode.
Oh my God, that is fantastic. Well, Jon, thank you so much. Appreciate what you do and love what you're doing with Getaway. Where's the best place for people to try out Getaway and to connect with you or follow you on social?
The web address is getaway.house and the Instagram is getawayhouse. And I am on LinkedIn at Jon Staff and on Instagram the same.
Jon, the legend. Thank you so much, Jon, for getting away with us today, sharing your powerful getaway story and tips for unplugging. I think I'm going to unplug right after this, but not until right after. And thank you, wild listeners, for getting away from real life just for a little bit to listen to this episode with Jon. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite podcast app and tell a friend about the podcast. Maybe you want to share a cabin with them in the woods via Getaway. I don't know, just a thought starter there. You can also find us on Good Pods, where you can find many of your favorite podcasts out there and recommendations from podcast people. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at MaxPodcasting.com. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!